They called me a useless failure. They lied to their friends that I had dropped out of medical school, letting my brother take credit for my groundbreaking research. I stayed perfectly silent for 10 years. But today, when the hospital director asked if I was ready to take over as the new owner, my mother dropped her glass in shock and my father just stared in absolute horror. My name is Caroline. I am 34 years old, and I spent the last decade building an empire in the shadows. Before I share how I orchestrated their ultimate downfall, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The VIP lounge at Oak Ridge General Hospital was suffocatingly elegant. Banners hung across the mahogany walls, boldly celebrating the imminent appointment of the new chief of surgery. That title was supposed to belong to a genius. Instead, it was being handed to my 36-year-old brother, Cameron. I stood quietly near the back of the room, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer, holding a glass of sparkling water. I was simply observing the room when my mother Brenda spotted me. She marched over with her jaw clenched. She snatched the glass right out of my hand with such aggressive force that cold drops splashed onto my sleeve. She did not offer a greeting. Instead, she shoved a crumpled parking validation ticket hard against my chest. "Are you here to beg?" she hissed. Her voice was deliberately dropped to a venomous whisper, so her wealthy friends across the room would not hear. "A useless dropout has no right to step foot in this VIP lounge. Get out before you ruin your brother's big day. This is a celebration for medical professionals, Caroline, not charity cases." I did not flinch. I just looked down at the crumpled ticket, then slowly up at her face. I had spent the last 10 years mastering the fine art of absolute detachment from her poison. Before I could formulate a verbal response, the exact social nightmare my mother was trying to prevent materialized right beside us. "Brenda, darling." A woman dripping in diamonds waved and sauntered over. I recognized her as Susan, one of my mother's most gossip-hungry friends. Susan looked at me. "Is this your daughter? The one who struggled so much?" Without missing a beat, my mother's face transformed into a mask of tragic maternal suffering. It was a performance she had perfected over a decade of high society dinners. "Yes, Susan." My mother sighed heavily. "Caroline has had a hard time finding her way since she dropped out of her program due to mental health issues. We try to support her even when she shows up uninvited looking for handouts. But today is about Cameron. We cannot let her chronic instability cast a shadow over his achievement." For 10 long years, my mother spun this exact lie. The narrative was carefully constructed and ruthlessly maintained. Cameron was the medical genius, the golden child carrying the family legacy, while I was the broken disappointment who could not handle the pressure of academia and vanished into obscurity. They did not know that 10 years ago, my biomedical thesis, an algorithm that revolutionized neurosurgical mapping, had been stolen by my own brother. He submitted my work to secure his residency. When I tried to expose him, my parents cornered me. They threatened to ruin my medical career if I dared tarnish Cameron's future. "Family protects family," my father told me. But he meant the family protects the son. The daughter is collateral damage. So I left. I moved out of state and let them tell their lies. I let them think they had won. But what they did not realize was that while they built a career on stolen glory, I was building a technology firm that would eventually buy this hospital. "Actually, Susan," a deep voice cut through the toxic air before the woman could offer me another look of pity. My brother-in-law Jamal stepped to my side. His imposing presence immediately shifted the power dynamic. As a top-tier financial attorney and an African-American man who had fought against systemic prejudice to reach the top of his field, Jamal had zero patience for my mother's gaslighting. "Do not speak about Caroline like that," Brenda Jamal said. "The truth about what happened 10 years ago is an open secret to anyone who actually matters. The only reason this family still believes your fairy tale is because you are the ones writing the checks." My mother's face went rigid. A red flush crept up her neck. She hated Jamal. She hated that my younger sister Hannah had married a man who saw right through the family facade, and she especially hated that Jamal could not be bought by my father's wealth. "Jamal, keep your voice down," Brenda hissed. "This is a private family matter. You and Hannah were invited today as a courtesy." Do not make me regret extending that invitation to you. You did not invite us, Hannah said, appearing right behind her husband. At 30 years old, Hannah was the only family member who had ever stood by me. She linked her arm through Jamal's. Caroline invited us. We came to support her, not Cameron. Brenda let out a sharp laugh. Caroline invited you? She does not even work here. She probably sneaked in through the delivery entrance. Now all of you stop causing a scene and get out before Richard sees you. Before I see what— The booming voice of my father Richard echoed from the entrance. The crowd of doctors naturally parted for him. He walked with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed his checkbook was a substitute for a personality. Right beside him, wearing his pristine white lab coat, was Cameron. The golden child had arrived. Cameron walked into the VIP lounge, soaking up the admiration of his peers. He flashed a practiced, charismatic smile that had charmed wealthy investors and fooled naive department heads for years. At 36 years old, he had the look of a catalog doctor. He wore perfectly styled hair, a heavy gold watch, and carried an aura of unearned confidence. He was currently surrounded by a flock of junior residents who looked at him like he was the second coming of modern medicine. But the moment his eyes locked onto me, standing near the catering table with Jamal and Hannah, his smile faltered. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his features before he quickly replaced it with a mask of condescending annoyance. He leaned over and whispered something into our father's ear. Richard marched toward us. His expensive loafers clicked sharply against the polished hardwood floor. He did not even bother to lower his voice. The entire room could hear him. Caroline, what in the world are you doing here? Richard demanded, completely ignoring Jamal and Hannah. This event is strictly for Oak Ridge General Staff and major donors. I specifically told hospital security not to let anyone without a VIP pass pass the lobby. I did not need a VIP pass, Dad, I replied. My voice was steady, and my posture remained relaxed. I walked right through the front doors. Cameron stepped up beside our father. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to look physically imposing. Look, Carrie, he said, using the childhood nickname I despised. His tone dripped with patronizing fake concern. I know you have been struggling lately. I know it is hard for you to see me moving up to chief of surgery while you are doing whatever it is you are doing now. But this is not the time or the place for one of your episodes. If you need cash for rent, Dad can write you a check later. Just go home. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He had not changed at all. He was still the exact same coward who had sneaked into my laptop 10 years ago. He had copied my biomedical mapping code and presented it to the admissions board as his own independent study. He had built his entire prestigious career on a foundation of my late-night coding, my clinical trials, and my genius. I am not here for rent money, Cameron, I said, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water, and I am certainly not having an episode. I am here because there are some significant changes happening at Oak Ridge General today, and I wanted a front-row seat to watch you experience them. Richard scoffed. He stepped right into my personal space in a blatant attempt at physical intimidation. The only change happening today is your brother officially taking over the surgical department, a position he earned through relentless hard work, something you would never understand. He puffed out his chest, his face red with indignation. I just finalized a $2 million donation to the hospital's research wing. Do you know what that means, Caroline? It means the board listens to me. It means Cameron's future is set in stone. Now turn around and walk out before I have you thrown out. Jamal chuckled. It was a deep, rich sound that immediately drew Richard's fury. You really think a $2 million bribe masks the sheer incompetence of your son's surgical record? Richard, Jamal asked smoothly. Because from where I am standing, that donation looks a lot like hush money. The exact kind of money you pay when you are terrified a hospital board is about to look too closely at a doctor's actual success rate. You watch your mouth, Jamal, Richard snapped. You are a guest in my domain right now. You know absolutely nothing about medicine. No, I know finance, Jamal retorted. His eyes flashed with sharp intelligence. And I know a bad investment when I see one. You have been pouring millions into this hospital for years. You do it to cover up Cameron's malpractice claims, his botched procedures, and his complete lack of original research since his magical breakthrough 10 years ago. Brenda gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace. How dare you? Cameron is a pioneer in neuromapping. I finally stepped forward. I closed the distance between my brother and me. I kept my voice low, ensuring only the five of us could clearly hear the next words, though the tension was drawing everyone's eyes. Are you a pioneer, Cameron? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Or are you just a parasite who has not had an original thought in a decade? You know, the funny thing about stealing someone else's algorithm is that eventually the technology evolves. It updates. And if you do not actually understand the foundational code, you cannot adapt when the software upgrades. Cameron's face drained of all color. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room. I do not know what you are talking about. My work is peer-reviewed. Is it, I challenged, taking another step closer? Because I saw the preliminary medical audit from last week. The one the board desperately tried to keep quiet. The one that clearly shows your surgical mapping software failed during 3 separate procedures this month, nearly paralyzing 2 patients. Shut up, Cameron hissed. Panic entirely took over his polished features. Keep your voice down, you crazy witch. You are using outdated code, Cameron. I continued mercilessly. Code that was written 10 years ago by a 24-year-old student. You have been patching it together with duct tape and daddy's money, but the system is collapsing. You actually thought $2 million would stop the Medical Ethics Board from noticing a 40% failure rate in your department. Richard slammed his hand down on a nearby cocktail table. A tray of glasses rattled violently. Several guests turned to stare, the polite chatter of the room dying down to an uncomfortable murmur. That is enough, Richard roared, losing all pretense of high society decorum. I will not stand here and listen to the jealous delusions of a failed dropout. You are nothing, Caroline. You have nothing. You accomplished nothing. You spent 10 years festering in your own resentment while your brother actually saved lives. Saved lives. Hannah spoke up, her voice trembling but incredibly resolute. She stepped out from behind Jamal, glaring directly at our father. He stole her thesis, Dad. We all know it. You knew it, Mom knew it, and you forced her out to protect him. You traded your daughter for a fake legacy. Silence! Hannah Brenda shrieked. She looked around in utter terror at the guests who were now actively watching the drama unfold. You are just as delusional as your sister. Richard, do something. Call security right now. Get these people out of here before the director arrives. Cameron was desperate to regain control of the situation and stop me from saying anything else about his audit. He waved frantically at 2 large security guards stationed by the mahogany double doors. Guards, over here immediately! Cameron yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me, Jamal, and Hannah. These 3 individuals are trespassing. They are harassing hospital staff and causing a massive public disturbance. I want them removed from the premises right now. Escort them out the back service elevator. The 2 security guards, both burly men with tactical earpieces and stern expressions, immediately pushed their way through the crowd of whispering doctors and wealthy donors. They approached our small group with their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. The entire VIP lounge went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop across the massive room. Dozens of eyes locked onto us, eagerly watching what appeared to be the spectacular public breakdown of the prestigious Reed family. Is there a problem here, Dr. Reed? The lead guard asked. He addressed Cameron with a respectful, deferential nod. Cameron straightened his posture. He tried to summon the absolute authority he believed he inherently possessed. He smoothed the lapels of his pristine white coat and gestured toward me with blatant disgust. Yes, officer. This woman and her companions are trespassing on private property. They do not have VIP clearance, and they are verbally assaulting me and my parents. As the incoming chief of surgery, I am officially requesting that you remove them from Oak Ridge General property immediately. If they resist your orders, call the local police and have them arrested for criminal trespassing. Brenda crossed her arms over her chest. A look of vicious satisfaction spread across her meticulously contoured face. She stepped closer, ready to deliver the final psychological blow she had spent a decade perfecting. You brought this entirely on yourself, Caroline, my mother said. Her tone shifted into that familiar, sickeningly sweet register she used to manipulate onlookers and play the victim. We tried so hard to help you. We offered you the best psychiatric treatment when your mind started slipping in college. We gave you every opportunity to heal quietly, But you chose to run away and fester in your own paranoid delusions. I told you to leave this room peacefully. Now you are going to be thrown out like common trash in front of the entire medical board. I hope this ultimate humiliation finally teaches you to stay in your place." Richard nodded firmly in agreement. He pulled his expensive smartphone from his tailored jacket pocket. "I am calling the hospital director right now to make sure you are permanently banned from the premises. You are completely unhinged. You have let your toxic jealousy of your brother poison your brain." I did not move a single muscle. I did not cry. I did not beg. I certainly did not look toward the glowing exit signs. I simply stood there with my hands clasped loosely in front of me, waiting for the trap to spring shut. Jamal leaned casually against a high-top cocktail table. He checked his luxury watch with a look of supreme boredom, entirely unfazed by my father's empty threats. Hannah held her breath, her hand gripping Jamal's arm tightly, but she stood tall beside me, refusing to back down. The lead security guard stepped toward me. His face was a blank mask of professional duty. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to follow me to the exit right now. Let us not make a scene in front of these guests." I looked directly at the guard. My voice remained perfectly level and clear. "Check your earpiece, Officer Davies." The guard paused. Confusion flashed quickly across his face. He glanced at my professional attire, suddenly unsure of his footing. "Excuse me?" "I said check your earpiece," I repeated calmly. "Switch to channel 4, the executive dispatch channel." Before the guard could even reach for his radio, his earpiece crackled to life on its own. A loud burst of static filled the quiet room, followed by a frantic, breathless voice transmitting directly into his device. The volume was loud enough that those standing close could clearly hear the tinny bleed of the audio. All units in the VIP lounge. Stand down. Repeat, stand down immediately. Do not engage the woman in the charcoal blazer. Code red. The director is en route to your location right now. Do not touch her." Officer Davies froze completely. He stared at me, then looked down at his radio, then looked back at my face. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks. He slowly took his hand off his utility belt and took a very deliberate step backward, creating physical distance between us. His partner, sensing the immediate and drastic shift in protocol, mirrored the exact same movement. "What are you doing?" Cameron demanded. His voice cracked with a sudden sharp edge of panic. "I gave you a direct order. Remove her from my party." "I cannot do that," Dr. Reed Officer Davies stammered. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He looked at me with an expression that bordered on absolute terror. "I have been ordered to stand down by executive command." "Executive command," Richard barked. He shoved his way past Cameron, stepping right into the guard's face. "I am a $2 million donor to this hospital. I sit on the highest advisory board. I am the executive command. Get this useless girl out of my sight before I have both of you fired and blacklisted from the security industry." "You cannot fire them," Richard Jamal said smoothly. He pushed off the cocktail table and stepped up beside me, acting as an impenetrable wall between my father and the guards. "Because you do not actually own anything here. You just buy fancy plaques with your name engraved on them. There is a very big difference between making a tax-deductible donation and holding the actual keys to the kingdom." "What is he talking about?" Brenda asked. Her voice trembled violently as she looked frantically between my father and my brother. "Cameron, what is going on? Why are they not throwing her out? Why are they listening to her?" "Because, Mom," I said. I finally let a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. "They do not take orders from random employees. And they certainly do not take orders from the families of hospital staff. They only take orders from the owner." Before anyone in my family could process the massive weight of that statement, the heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the VIP lounge swung open with a resounding violent bang. Dr. Harrison, the current director of Oak Ridge General Hospital, burst into the room. He was a man in his late 50s, usually known for his calm, unshakable demeanor. But right now, he was practically sprinting. He was completely out of breath. His silk tie was slightly askew. He was followed closely by a phalanx of men and women in sharp, dark business suits. A team of high-powered corporate lawyers carrying thick briefcases, their faces strictly professional, creating an imposing presence that immediately silenced the whispers in the room. "Director Harrison." Cameron called out. A massive wave of relief washed over his panicked face. He quickly moved forward to intercept the older man. Thank goodness you are here. My sister is having a severe mental breakdown. She is trespassing and causing a massive scene in front of our esteemed guests. The security guards are refusing to do their jobs. I need you to authorize her immediate removal so we can continue with my appointment ceremony. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping up firmly beside his son to assert his dominance. Harrison, I am glad you could make it to witness this incompetence. I expect a full written apology for this blatant lack of security. When I wrote that $2 million check yesterday, I was promised an exclusive, highly secure event for my son. Director Harrison did not blink. He did not extend his hand to accept my father's greeting. He did not even look at the angry, red-faced patriarch standing directly in his path. Harrison simply stood there catching his breath, while the phalanx of corporate lawyers fanned out behind him like an impenetrable wall of expensive wool and silk. Richard dropped his hand. The arrogant smirk on his face quickly morphed into a scowl of deep offense. He was a man who demanded instant obedience. He expected the world to bow when he opened his wallet, and Harrison's blank stare was a direct insult to his authority. I asked you a question, Harrison, Richard barked. His voice echoed off the high ceilings of the VIP lounge. I wrote a check for $2 million to your research department yesterday afternoon. That money was specifically earmarked to ensure my son's transition to chief of surgery was seamless and completely free of distractions. I paid for an exclusive event. Yet I walk in here to find useless security guards refusing to throw out a trespassing vagrant. I want them fired immediately. Cameron stepped up right beside his father, bolstered by the mention of the massive donation. He puffed out his chest and pointed a manicured finger at me. You heard him, Director. This woman is my estranged sister. She dropped out of her academic programs years ago and has been harboring a toxic, obsessive jealousy toward my medical career ever since. She is mentally unstable. She sneaked in here to cause a scene and extort money from my family. If you do not have her removed this instant, my father will cancel that $2 million check before the bank even opens tomorrow. A low murmur swept through the crowd of elite surgeons and wealthy donors. People were exchanging shocked glances. Richard had just openly admitted in a room full of medical professionals that his charitable donation was actually a transactional bribe to secure his son's promotion. His sheer arrogance had completely blinded him to how devastating that confession sounded out loud. I did not interrupt him. I simply stood there and let my father dig his own grave. I wanted everyone in that room to hear exactly how the Reed family operated. Do you really think $2 million buys you an entire hospital, Dad? I asked. My voice was calm, cutting effortlessly through the heavy tension in the room. Do you honestly believe you can just purchase a medical department to hide the fact that your son is completely incompetent? Richard whipped his head around to face me. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated fury. He took a heavy step forward, closing the distance between us, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he always did when I was a child. But I was not a child anymore, and I did not step back. That is exactly how the real world works, Caroline, Richard sneered. His face was so close to mine I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. Money dictates reality. Money buys power, it buys influence, and it buys legacies. I bought this surgical wing to protect my son's future. Something you will never understand because you were too weak to play the game. You failed. You gave up. You ran away because you could not handle the pressure of being a Reed. And now you come crawling back utterly penniless, trying to drag your brother down to your miserable level. Brenda let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. She crossed her arms and looked at me with absolute disgust. Listen to your father, Caroline. He is the savior of Oak Ridge General. Without his financial backing, this entire surgical department would be struggling. Cameron is a brilliant doctor, but your father's generosity is what guarantees his rightful place at the top. You have nothing to offer this world. Look at you. You are wearing a cheap suit standing in a room full of people who actually matter, trying to ruin a celebration you could never earn for yourself. I slowly turned my gaze from my mother back to my father. I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. Did you actually read the fine print on that donation contract, Richard? I asked smoothly. Or did you just sign it blindly because you were so desperate to cover up Cameron's disastrous surgical audit from last week? Richard stiffened. The mention of the audit clearly struck a nerve, but his ego refused to let him back down. I do not need to read the fine print of a standard endowment contract. My legal team handled the transfer. The money went directly into the hospital's primary research subsidiary account. It is my money and I dictate how it is used. I am canceling the transfer right now. He pulled out his phone aggressively, tapping the screen to unlock it. I am calling my bank. I am freezing the funds. You will not see a single penny of that $2 million, Harrison. You have completely ruined my son's day. Jamal let out a loud, echoing laugh that made Richard freeze with his thumb hovering over his phone screen. You really should have read the fine print, Richard Jamal said cheerfully. He stepped forward and pulled a crisp manila folder from the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. As a financial attorney, I always advise my clients to read the routing details before wiring $2 million. You see, you did not wire that money to an independent hospital account. You wired it to a subsidiary holding company that manages Oak Ridge General's research assets. Richard glared at Jamal, his breathing becoming heavy and labored. A subsidiary is still part of the hospital. It makes no difference. I will have the board reverse the transaction. The lead corporate lawyer standing behind Director Harrison finally stepped forward. She was a tall, imposing woman with a severe expression. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at my father. Actually, Mr. Reed, it makes a very significant difference, the lawyer stated. Her voice was pure ice, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute legal authority. The subsidiary holding company you wired your funds to was acquired exactly 48 hours ago. The transaction cleared our escrow accounts at 8 o'clock this morning. Your donation is now legally bound by the terms of the new parent company. You cannot cancel the check. You cannot reverse the wire. The funds have already been irrevocably absorbed into the corporate infrastructure. Richard lowered his phone. His hands began to tremble visibly. He looked frantically at the lawyer, then at Jamal, and finally at Director Harrison. What parent company? Richard demanded. His voice was losing its booming confidence, replaced by a thin, reedy edge of panic. Harrison, what is she talking about? What parent company bought the research subsidiary? I demand you summon the hospital board immediately. I will have this reversed by executive order. Director Harrison finally looked Richard straight in the eye. He straightened his shoulders and let out a long, heavy breath. I cannot summon the board, Mr. Reed, Harrison said quietly. The room was so silent that his voice seemed to echo off the walls. I no longer answer to the board. In fact, as of 10 minutes ago, the board has been entirely dissolved. Cameron grabbed his father's shoulder. His pristine catalog doctor image was completely shattering. What do you mean the board is dissolved? Who do you answer to? Director Harrison turned away from my father and my brother. He took 2 deliberate steps toward me. He ignored the gasps and whispers of the wealthy donors surrounding us. He smoothed his tie, lowered his gaze, and then, to the absolute shock of everyone in the room, Director Harrison bowed his head respectfully. I answer to her, Director Harrison stated. His voice rang out with absolute finality, cutting through the stunned silence of the VIP lounge. He kept his head respectfully bowed in my direction, before turning slightly to face my paralyzed family. Dr. Caroline Reed is the founder and CEO of MedTech Innovations. As of 8 o'clock this morning, her holding company successfully completed the acquisition of the Oak Ridge Health System. She is the new majority shareholder and the acting chief medical officer of this entire hospital. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The elite surgeons and wealthy donors who had been hanging on to my father every word just moments ago were now backing away from him. It was as if Richard and Brenda had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. Cameron staggered backward. His pristine catalog doctor posture completely collapsed. He bumped into the catering table, knocking over a stack of silver plates. The loud clatter masked the sound of his ragged breathing. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. The golden child was finally realizing that his entire reality had been a meticulously constructed illusion. That is a lie, Brenda shrieked. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. She grabbed my father by the arm, shaking him violently. Richard, do something. Tell them this is a lie. She is a college dropout. She is useless. She does not own a company. She does not own anything. Richard could not speak. His face was a horrifying shade of gray. As a man who had built his life on wielding financial power, he understood exactly what it meant when a corporate legal team stood behind someone. He knew the acquisition was real. He knew his $2 million bribe was gone. And he knew he had absolutely no leverage left. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer weight of my presence forced the crowd to part from me. I stopped 2 feet away from my brother. "Let us talk about your legacy," Cameron, I said coldly. "Let us talk about the brilliant medical career you and our parents love to boast about. 10 years ago, you were failing your surgical rotations. You lacked the spatial reasoning required for neurosurgery. You were desperate. So you broke into my apartment while I was asleep. You stole the encrypted hard drive containing my undergraduate biomedical thesis. You took 3 years of my uncompensated grueling research on neural mapping algorithms, stripped my name off the title page, and submitted it to the residency board as your own independent study." Cameron shook his head frantically. His perfectly styled hair fell into his panicked eyes. "No, no, I earned my place here. I am a pioneer." "You are a fraud," I corrected him sharply. "When I found out what you did, I went to Mom and Dad. I begged them to help me. I expected them to do the right thing. Instead, they locked me in Dad's office. They told me that a daughter career was secondary to a son reputation. They threatened to cut off my tuition, ruin my credit, and have me blacklisted from every medical school in the country if I exposed you. They handed you my genius on a silver platter and called me useless for daring to complain." Hannah stepped up beside me. Her eyes blazed with years of suppressed anger. She looked right at our mother. "You threw Caroline away to protect a thief. You told everyone she had a mental breakdown. You lied to our relatives, your friends, the entire world. And you forced me to keep quiet under threat of disowning me too." Jamal placed a supportive hand on Hannah's shoulder. His presence remained a calm, unyielding fortress against my parents' toxic desperation. He looked at Cameron with pure, unfiltered disgust. "You built a house on stolen land," Cameron, Jamal said, "and now the true owner is here to collect the rent." I gestured to the lead corporate lawyer standing behind Director Harrison. She stepped forward and opened her heavy leather briefcase. She retrieved a thick stack of manila folders and began handing them out to the senior doctors and hospital board members who were still lingering in the room. "What you are holding is the unredacted preliminary medical audit of the Oak Ridge Neurosurgery Department," I announced to the room. I kept my gaze locked on Cameron. "The software you stole from me 10 years ago was an incomplete prototype. It was a theoretical model. It was never meant to be used in live human trials without continuous machine learning calibration. But you did not know that, did you, Cameron? Because you do not actually understand the foundational code. You just memorized the user manual I wrote." Cameron's chest heaved. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Please, Carrie," he whispered. His voice was small, pathetic, and utterly broken. "Do not do this. We are family." "We are not family," I replied instantly. "I am your consequence. For 10 years, you have been using degrading, uncalibrated software during live brain surgeries. You patched it together with temporary fixes, hoping no one would notice the glitches. But the system is finally collapsing. The audit in those folders proves that your department has a 40% failure rate this quarter alone. Your stolen algorithm malfunctioned during 3 separate procedures last week. You nearly paralyzed 2 patients because the software miscalculated the neural pathways." A chorus of shocked murmurs erupted from the doctors reading the files. A senior neurosurgeon, a man who had previously mentored Cameron, looked up from the audit report. His face was twisted in absolute horror. "Good God," the senior doctor gasped. "The data input vectors are completely misaligned. Reed, you have been flying blind in the operating room. You hid these complication reports from the surgical review committee." "I did not have a choice," Cameron cried out, tears finally spilling down his face. "The system kept freezing. I tried to fix it. I tried to pay developers to patch the code, but they said it was locked behind a proprietary firewall." "A firewall I built," I stated flatly. "A firewall designed specifically to prevent unauthorized users from tampering with medical technology. You have been actively endangering human lives just to maintain your fake reputation. You let patients suffer because you were too arrogant to admit you did not know what you were doing." Brenda lunged forward, trying to slap the folders out of the senior doctor's hands. Give me those. These are lies. My son is a hero. Richard, call your lawyers right now. Sue them for defamation. Richard did not move. He was staring at the audit file Jamal had just shoved into his chest. His hands shook so violently the papers rattled. He read the exact breakdown of how his $2 million bribe had been legally seized by my holding company to cover the massive malpractice liabilities his son had just generated. You cannot sue me, Mom, I said. I turned away from my sobbing brother and locked eyes with the woman who had ruined my youth. Because every single word is backed by irrefutable data. I own the patent to the software. I own the holding company that just bought this hospital. And I own the absolute legal right to destroy the fake legacy you built on my back. You think you have won, Caroline? Richard snarled, his voice shaking with a toxic mix of rage and sheer desperation. You think buying a hospital makes you invincible? I still have connections in this city. I sit on the boards of 3 different pharmaceutical companies. I can have MedTech Innovations blacklisted by tomorrow morning. I can ruin you. Brenda eagerly latched on to my father's desperate threat. Exactly, she spat, her face twisted in a vicious sneer. You have always been a vindictive, ungrateful brat. We gave you everything, and you repay us by trying to destroy your brother. If you do not walk out that door right now and sign this hospital back over to the board, you will be permanently dead to us. We will publicly disown you. We will tell the press that you forged these audits just to be spiteful. I looked at them in utter disbelief. They were standing in the smoking wreckage of their own lies, yet they were still trying to issue ultimatums. They genuinely believed their social status could override federal law and medical ethics. Disown me? I asked, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. You already did that 10 years ago, Mom. You cannot banish someone who already holds the deed to the kingdom. Richard stepped forward, attempting to salvage his rapidly crumbling authority. I am giving you one last chance, Caroline. I will write you a check for $5 million right now. You drop this ridiculous vendetta. You seal those audit records permanently. You transfer ownership of the research wing back to the board, and you leave this city. You take your money, and you disappear just like you did before. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulling out a sleek silver pen and a premium checkbook. I was so incredibly predictable. When intimidation failed, Richard Reed always resorted to his wallet. $5 million. He repeated, his eyes darting toward Director Harrison, desperate to show the room he was still the man in charge. That is more money than you could ever spend. Take it and walk away. Leave your brother's career intact. Jamal scoffed loudly from beside me. Richard, are you genuinely trying to bribe the chief medical officer in front of a dozen witnesses? That is a federal offense. I stepped closer to my father, my gaze icy and unyielding. Put your checkbook away, Richard. You do not have $5 million in liquid assets anymore. I know exactly how heavily leveraged your real estate firm is. You took out a massive high-interest loan just to cover the $2 million bribe you paid yesterday. If you write that check, it will bounce and you will be facing bank fraud on top of everything else. Richard froze his pen, hovering helplessly over the paper. The last ounce of color drained from his face as he realized I knew the exact details of his precarious financial situation. You have no power here, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the dead silent room. This is my hospital. You tried to banish me 10 years ago because I threatened your perfect illusion. Now I am the one issuing the ultimatum. I turned my attention back to Cameron. He was trembling violently, clutching the edge of the catering table for support. You have exactly 2 options, Cameron. I stated, my tone offering zero room for negotiation. Option 1. You voluntarily surrender your medical license today. You sign a full confession admitting to intellectual property theft and medical malpractice. You step down quietly and I do not press criminal charges. Brenda let out a horrified gasp. You cannot do that. He is your brother. Option 2. I continued, ignoring my mother entirely. You refuse. In which case, my legal team will hand this unredacted audit over to the police, the federal health authorities, and the national media. You will be arrested, tried, and imprisoned. The choice is yours, but you will make it right now. The silence in the VIP lounge was deafening. Cameron stared at me. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked at our father, begging for a lifeline that no longer existed. Richard stared blindly at the floor, completely paralyzed by the realization of his impending bankruptcy. "This cannot be happening," Cameron muttered. He grabbed the lapels of his white coat, pulling at them as if the fabric itself was choking him. "I am the chief of surgery. I am a Reed. You cannot do this to me." "I am not doing anything to you, Cameron," I replied evenly. "You did this to yourself the moment you prioritized your ego over patient safety." Brenda let out a guttural, terrifying scream. The pristine high society matriarch completely vanished. She lunged forward with her hands curled into claws aiming directly for my face. "You ungrateful monster. I gave birth to you. I clothed you. I fed you. I will tear your eyes out." She never reached me. Jamal stepped effortlessly into her path. He did not even break a sweat. He simply raised one broad hand, catching my mother by the wrist before her manicured nails could make contact. He held her there easily, overpowering her frantic struggling. "Assaulting the chief medical officer in front of 24 witnesses and a team of corporate lawyers is a terrible strategy," Brenda Jamal said. His voice was dangerously soft. "I strongly advise you to step back." "Let go of my wife," Richard bellowed. The sudden burst of violence seemed to snap him out of his financial shock. He charged toward Jamal, his fists clenched. That was the point of no return. Officer Davies and his partner did not hesitate. The security guards, who just minutes ago had been terrified of making a mistake, now knew exactly who signed their paychecks. They intercepted Richard with practiced, brutal efficiency. Officer Davies grabbed my father by the shoulders, spinning him around and pinning his arms behind his back. The second guard stepped between Jamal and my mother, forcing Brenda backward until she stumbled into a cocktail table. "Get your hands off me," Richard roared. He struggled against the guard's iron grip. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do you know who I am? I will have you destroyed." "You are a trespasser," Officer Davies stated firmly. His tone held zero sympathy. "And you are causing a physical altercation on hospital property. Cease resisting immediately, or I will place you in handcuffs." Cameron watched his parents being physically restrained by the very security team he had tried to weaponize against me. His mind finally snapped. He pointed a trembling finger at Dr. Harrison. "Harrison, you have to stop this," Cameron yelled. "You have known my family for a decade. You know what I bring to this hospital. She is lying. The audit is flawed. You cannot let her steal my department." Dr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. He looked at Cameron with an expression of profound pity and absolute disgust. "I am not letting her steal anything," Dr. Reed Harrison said. "The audit was conducted by an independent third-party firm. I saw the raw data myself. Your department has been covering up near-fatal errors for months. You falsified patient consent forms to use an unverified software patch. The board was preparing to suspend you before the acquisition even went through." Dr. Caroline Reed simply accelerated the inevitable. Cameron staggered backward. The remaining color drained from his face. "You knew?" he whispered. "Of course we knew," Harrison replied coldly. "We were just waiting for the legal department to finalize the liability paperwork. Your career as a surgeon ended the moment you placed your arrogance above human life." I stepped forward, reclaiming the center of the room. The entire crowd of elite doctors and wealthy donors watched in stunned fascination. The Reed family empire was burning to the ground in real time, and I was holding the match. "You asked me to leave quietly 10 years ago, Mom," I said. I looked at Brenda, who was sobbing hysterically while the security guard kept her pinned against the table. "You told me that I was an embarrassment. You told me that Cameron was the future. Well, take a good look at your future now." I turned to the lead security guard. "Officer Davies, please escort these 3 individuals off the premises. They are permanently banned from Oak Ridge General and all affiliated properties. If they attempt to enter the building again, have them arrested for trespassing." "Yes," Dr. Reed. Officer Davies responded immediately. "Wait," Cameron pleaded. His voice cracked completely. He fell to his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor. The golden child, the brilliant surgeon, the arrogant thief was finally begging. "Carrie, please. I will do anything. I will sign the confession. I will surrender my license. Just do not send me to prison. I cannot go to prison." Richard struggled against the guard holding him. "Stand up, Cameron. Do not beg her. We will fight this in court. We will hire the best defense team in the country." "With what money?" Richard Jamal asked cheerfully. Your assets are tied up in leveraged real estate. Your cash is sitting in Caroline's escrow account. You are bankrupt. You could not even afford a public defender right now. Take them away, I ordered. The guards moved swiftly. They hauled Richard toward the heavy mahogany doors. My father kicked and cursed, shouting empty threats that echoed down the hospital corridor. Another team of guards summoned by Davy's radio arrived to handle Brenda and Cameron. My mother kicked her designer heels, screaming my name. She called me a monster. She called me a demon. She demanded that someone call the police to arrest me for stealing her son's life. No one moved to help her. The wealthy friends she had spent years trying to impress simply turned their backs, sipping their champagne as she was dragged out of the room. Cameron was the last to go. Two guards hauled him to his feet by his armpits. He was sobbing uncontrollably. The pristine white lab coat he wore with such immense pride was now wrinkled and stained with spilled wine from the table he had crashed into. He looked back at me one last time as they dragged him through the doors. I did not offer him a single shred of sympathy. I simply turned my back on him. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut. The loud thud echoed through the silent VIP lounge. The toxic presence of my family was finally eradicated from my life. I stood there for a long moment, letting the profound silence wash over me. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 10 years instantly evaporated. I was free. Dr. Harrison stepped up beside me. He offered a polite, respectful nod. "Dr. Reed," he said quietly, "the surgical staff is waiting in the main auditorium. They are eager to meet their new chief medical officer." I smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer. I looked at Hannah, who was wiping tears of absolute relief from her eyes. Jamal gave me a proud, triumphant smile. "Lead the way, Director Harrison," I said. "I have a hospital to run." The walk from the VIP lounge to the main auditorium felt like a victory lap, 10 years in the making. The polished corridors of Oak Ridge General Hospital, once a place where my brother Cameron strutted like a god, now belonged entirely to me. Jamal and Hannah walked perfectly in step beside me. Jamal emanated quiet power in his navy suit, while Hannah held her head high, unbothered by the spectacle our parents caused. Ahead of us, Director Harrison led the way, his corporate legal team falling into a tight protective V formation around my flanks. News traveled fast in a hospital. By the time we reached the grand double doors of the auditorium, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted dramatically. Nurses attending physicians and administrative staff parted like the Red Sea. They pressed their backs against the walls, eyes wide with shock. They had all seen my parents and my brother being dragged out through the service elevators by hospital security just moments ago. The invincible Reed family had fallen, and everyone was desperate to see who held the bloodied sword. Harrison pushed open the heavy doors. The massive amphitheater was packed to maximum capacity. 500 medical professionals and affluent donors sat in the velvet seats. They had gathered here to witness Cameron Reed be crowned Chief of Surgery. A massive digital banner above the stage still read, "Congratulations, Dr. Cameron Reed." I looked at that banner, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical resolve. Jamal caught my gaze and offered a sharp, knowing smile. He typed a quick command on his phone, and within seconds the screen flickered. The digital banner went pitch black. When it illuminated a moment later, the glowing white text simply read, "Welcome, Dr. Caroline Reed, Chief Medical Officer." A collective gasp swept through the enormous room. The ambient chatter instantly died, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence. 500 faces turned toward the stage as I walked up the stairs, my charcoal blazer cutting a sharp silhouette. Director Harrison stepped directly up to the main podium. He adjusted the microphone, his expression grave and absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," Director Harrison began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "There has been a fundamental shift in the leadership and ownership structure of Oak Ridge General. Effective immediately, the Reed family endowment has been legally seized due to gross violations of medical ethics. Dr. Cameron Reed has been permanently terminated, and his medical license is currently under federal review. I am here to formally introduce your new majority shareholder and Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Caroline Reed." The silence shattered. Chaos erupted across the auditorium. Doctors jumped to their feet, shouting questions. Donors who had backed my father demanded explanations. The noise was deafening, a wave of panic from people who realized their corrupt ecosystem had just been destroyed. I stepped up to the podium. I did not tap the microphone. I did not raise my hand to ask for quiet. I simply stared at the crowd with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. It took exactly 15 seconds for the sheer weight of my silence to crush the rebellion. One by one, the shouting doctors lowered their voices. One by one, they sat back down in their velvet seats, suddenly terrified of drawing my attention. "Thank you, Director Harrison," I said. My voice was smooth, carrying easily across the cavernous space. "For the past 10 years, this hospital has operated under a facade of excellence, funded by my father's checkbook. You allowed a surgeon who could not even write basic code to operate on human brains using stolen, degrading technology. You turned a blind eye to a 40% surgical failure rate because the money kept flowing. That era of deadly incompetence ends today." A man in the third row stood up. It was Dr. Gregory Thorne, the deputy chief of surgery, and Cameron's most loyal sycophant who directly benefited from my father's bribes. "This is an absolute outrage," Dr. Thorne shouted, pointing an accusing finger at the stage. "You cannot just march in here and stage a hostile takeover. Cameron Reed is a brilliant surgeon. You are just a bitter sister trying to ruin his life because you could not cut it. We will not stand for this. If you do not step down immediately, I will organize a mass walkout of every senior surgeon in this hospital. You will have no staff left to run your new empire." Several other doctors in Cameron's inner circle stood up, crossing their arms and nodding in agreement. They thought they held the leverage. They thought they could intimidate me the way my parents had tried to. I looked down at Dr. Thorne, letting a sharp, dangerous smile touch my lips. Jamal stepped forward and placed a thick manila folder directly on the podium in front of me. I opened it slowly, savoring the sudden shift in the room's energy. "Dr. Gregory Thorne," I read aloud, my voice dripping with icy precision. "You co-signed 17 of Cameron's botched procedures over the last 6 months. You deliberately falsified patient recovery reports to hide the fact that the neural mapping software was malfunctioning. You actively participated in a conspiracy to commit medical fraud, and you received a $200,000 bonus from my father's holding company for your silence." Thorne's face drained of color. His hand dropped to his side. The surgeons who had stood in solidarity suddenly took deliberate steps away, desperately trying to distance themselves from a sinking ship. "I did not come here to negotiate with corrupt accomplices," I continued mercilessly. "I came here to clean house." I nodded to the back of the auditorium. The heavy doors swung open, and a squad of 6 elite hospital security guards marched down the center aisle. They moved with absolute authority, surrounding Dr. Thorne's row before he could even process what was happening. "Officer Davies," I said, looking directly at the lead guard who had escorted my parents out earlier, "please escort Dr. Thorne and his associates off the premises immediately. Their employment is terminated, and their files have already been forwarded to the local authorities for criminal investigation." "You cannot do this." Thorne panicked, his voice cracking as the guards grabbed his arms. "I am tenured. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," I replied coldly, watching the guards drag him up the aisle. "I suggest you use it." I turned my gaze back to the terrified audience. No one dared to breathe. The shift in authority was absolute, brutal, and undeniable. I owned this hospital, and I was going to rebuild it from the ground up starting now. Before I could utter my next command, a sharp burst of static shattered the absolute silence of the room. The noise erupted from the heavy utility belt of Officer Davies, who was standing near the exit doors after handing Dr. Thorne off to his subordinates. The radio crackled violently, broadcasting a frantic, out-of-breath voice that echoed off the high acoustic ceilings of the amphitheater. "Officer Davies, we have a code red in Sector 4, the voice yelled over the radio. "Suspect Cameron Reed has broken free from the escort detail at the loading dock. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed his way through the emergency stairwell doors. He is not leaving the premises. He is heading straight down to the sub-basement. He is going for the primary server hub." A massive wave of genuine terror washed over the 500 medical professionals seated before me. The polite, fearful silence I had just established instantly dissolved into absolute chaos. The doctors knew exactly what was housed in the sub-basement. It was not just the surgical schedules or the billing departments. The primary server hub contained the legacy data drives. Those drives held decades of highly sensitive patient histories, active clinical trial algorithms, and the original unredacted surgical logs that Cameron was desperate to destroy. If he managed to smash those physical drives, he would not just be erasing his own malpractice records. He would be wiping out the life-saving medical histories of thousands of vulnerable patients. Director Harrison rushed forward, his face completely pale. "Dr. Reed, we have to initiate a full facility lockdown," Harrison urged, his voice trembling with the panic of the unknown. "If your brother breaches that server room, the collateral damage to this hospital will be catastrophic. We will face billions in federal compliance fines. He is completely unhinged. We need to evacuate the surgical wings immediately." The doctors in the audience began to stand up. Panic is highly contagious, and the sheer terror of losing their clinical data had them pushing toward the aisles. They were preparing to scatter, preparing to let the chaos win. "Sit down," I commanded. I did not shout, I did not scream, but I projected my voice with such sharp metallic authority that the entire room froze in place. I turned to Jamal, who was already standing right beside the podium. He did not look panicked. Like me, Jamal thrived in high-stakes environments where other people lost their minds. He calmly opened his sleek silver laptop and rested it on the podium. "Jamal, connect to the MedTech overriding protocol," I instructed, clearly, making sure the microphone picked up every single word. "Override the Oak Ridge legacy systems and mirror your display directly to the main auditorium projector. Show them." Jamal's fingers flew across his keyboard with blistering speed. My brother-in-law was a financial and legal mastermind, but he had also spent the last year intimately learning every backdoor into the Oak Ridge digital infrastructure to help me build my acquisition case. Within 10 seconds, the massive digital screen above the stage blinked. The bright white welcome banner vanished. In its place, a crisp, high-definition security feed flickered to life. The camera angle looked down upon the sterile, heavily fortified hallway of the sub-basement. The entire auditorium gasped in unison. There, on the 50-foot screen, was my brother. Cameron was sprinting down the desolate hallway. His expensive dress shoes slipped on the polished linoleum. His pristine white lab coat flapped behind him like a broken sail. He was wielding a heavy red fire extinguisher in both hands, swinging it wildly as he approached the reinforced glass doors of the primary server hub. He looked exactly like a cornered, rabid animal. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his face was twisted in a mask of absolute desperation. "He thinks he can destroy the evidence," Jamal noted with a dry, humorless chuckle. "He actually thinks physical hard drives matter when we migrated the entire hospital database to the encrypted MedTech cloud servers at 4 o'clock this morning." "Let him figure that out the hard way," I replied softly. I reached over and picked up the handheld radio unit from the podium, which Director Harrison used for facility-wide announcements. I switched the frequency channel to broadcast directly into the sub-basement PA system. I wanted the 500 elite professionals in this auditorium to see the exact moment their golden boy realized he was completely powerless. I pressed the transmission button. "Cameron." I spoke into the radio. On the massive screen above us, Cameron froze mid-stride. He dropped the fire extinguisher. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that we could not hear but could feel in the sheer tension of the moment. He looked up wildly at the ceiling speakers, his chest heaving. "You are currently being broadcast live to the main auditorium," I stated. My voice was eerily calm, echoing through the speakers in the basement and simultaneously filling the amphitheater. 500 of your peers, your mentors, and your wealthy donors are sitting right here watching you behave like a common criminal." Cameron stumbled backward. He stared directly into the security camera mounted above the server room doors. The sheer naked terror in his eyes was magnified 50 times over on the giant projector screen. The doctors in the audience stared in absolute revulsion at the man they had once respected. "You thought you could destroy the evidence of your incompetence," I continued mercilessly. "You thought smashing a few hard drives would erase the fact that you paralyzed patients and stole my biomedical thesis. But you are 10 years behind the technology, Cameron. You always have been. I migrated every single file, every surgical log, and every piece of patient data to an encrypted off-site cloud server before you even woke up this morning. That room you are trying to break into is completely empty. Cameron fell to his knees. The realization crashed down on him like a physical blow. He covered his face with his hands, sobbing violently. There was no escape. There was no father with a check him. There was no mother to lie on his behalf. He was completely exposed, stripped of his fake legacy, and facing the absolute destruction of his life. I turned off the radio. I looked out at the audience. The panic of the unknown had entirely vanished from the room, replaced by a deep, terrifying respect for the woman standing on the stage. "Officer Davies," I said, looking back at the lead security guard. "My brother has just attempted to destroy hospital property and tamper with federal medical records. Call the local police department. Have him arrested for attempted corporate sabotage and criminal trespassing. Keep him detained in the basement until law enforcement arrives in handcuffs." "Understood, Dr. Reed." The guard replied immediately, sprinting out the doors to execute my command. I turned back to the microphone, looking over the sea of silent, wide-eyed professionals. The power dynamic in Oak Ridge General had not just shifted, it had been completely rewritten in stone. Now that the distractions have been permanently removed, I announced, my voice cutting through the heavy air with absolute finality. "We have a hospital to clean up. Any surgeon who wishes to maintain their employment here will submit to a full review by my proprietary medical auditing software by tomorrow morning. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. If you are corrupt, you will be gone by sunset. Welcome to the new Oak Ridge." I gave a sharp nod to Director Harrison. He immediately stepped off the stage and signaled the private security personnel stationed around the perimeter of the amphitheater. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room slammed shut. The metallic clack of the deadbolts engaging echoed like a gunshot in the suddenly breathless space. A fresh wave of panic surged through the velvet seats. Several doctors jumped to their feet, their eyes darting toward the sealed exits. The wealthy donors who had remained behind to witness my brother's coronation now looked like trapped prey. "You cannot hold us hostage," a loud, indignant voice shouted from the second row. Administrator Wallace stood up. He was a balding, red-faced man who had served as the head of the Hospital Admissions and Ethics Committee for 15 years. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is false imprisonment. I am calling the police right now." I did not flinch. I simply looked at Jamal. My brother-in-law stepped up to the microphone, his posture radiating absolute legal authority. "Call the police," Administrator Wallace Jamal offered cheerfully. "We actually encourage it. In fact, there are 3 squad cars currently pulling into the loading dock to arrest Cameron, so they are already on the premises. But before you dial, you should review Section 4 of your employment contract, which you updated during the acquisition phase yesterday. This is a mandatory all-hands corporate compliance meeting. Any staff member who breaches the sealed doors before the meeting concludes will be legally initiating their immediate voluntary resignation. You will forfeit your severance package, your stock options, and your medical liability shielding." Wallace froze. His hand hovered halfway to his pocket where his phone rested. The other doctors who had stood up in protest slowly sank back into their seats, terrified of losing their financial safety nets. "Please sit down, Wallace," I commanded from the podium. I locked eyes with the man who had facilitated the darkest period of my life. "I have been waiting a decade to have this specific conversation with you, and I will not have it interrupted by your cowardice." Wallace swallowed hard, his arrogant bluster rapidly deflating. "What are you talking about? I have done nothing to you." I picked up a thin blue folder from the stack Jamal had prepared. I opened it and read the top page. "10 years ago, you were the deciding vote on the Surgical Residency Admissions Board. When Cameron submitted a groundbreaking biomedical neuromapping thesis, another student came to your office. She provided time-stamped data logs proving Cameron had stolen the code from her computer. She begged you to look at the raw data." The auditorium fell completely silent again. Wallace wiped a layer of sweat from his forehead. "That was an internal academic dispute. The board found no conclusive evidence. The board found $250,000 deposited into an offshore account registered to your wife." I corrected him coldly. "My father wired that money 3 days after I came to your office. You buried my complaint. You approved Cameron's residency. You sold my future to buy your vacation home in the Hamptons. Wallace collapsed into his seat, as if the bones in his legs had suddenly dissolved. He covered his face with his hands, letting out a wretched sound of defeat. The surgeons sitting next to him physically recoiled, leaning away from him in their chairs to avoid being associated with his blatant corruption. "Nobody leaves this room!" I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, toxic air of the amphitheater. "The doors are locked because we are quarantining a disease. For years, my family used their wealth to infect this hospital with incompetence, and many of you eagerly held out your hands to catch the falling cash. You sacrificed patient safety for department funding. You looked the other way while my brother ruined lives. Now the quarantine has begun." I turned to Director Harrison, who was standing tall by the stage stairs. He looked utterly rejuvenated, like a man who had finally been freed from a suffocating prison. "Director, initiate the system-wide audit lock," I ordered. Harrison pulled a secure tablet from his briefcase and entered his administrative override credentials. On the massive projector screen above my head, the security camera feed of the basement vanished. It was instantly replaced by a scrolling digital list of every doctor, administrator, and department head currently sitting in the auditorium. Beside each name, a progress bar appeared, blinking rapidly as my medtech software began tearing through their digital histories. "My proprietary algorithm is currently cross-referencing every single patient outcome billing record and surgical log attached to your medical licenses," I explained to the captivated audience. "It is searching for discrepancies, hidden malpractice settlements, and kickbacks from the Reed family endowment. The doors to this auditorium will remain locked until the software finishes its preliminary scan." A woman in the front row, a prominent cardiologist, raised her hand tentatively. Her voice shook with genuine fear. "Dr. Reed, what happens when the scan finishes?" "If your name turns green," I replied smoothly, "you will receive a new keycard. You will retain your position, and you will be part of the medical revolution I am bringing to Oak Ridge. You will practice medicine with absolute integrity, backed by the best technology in the world." I let a heavy, dangerous silence stretch across the room before delivering the final blow. "But if your name turns red on that screen," I continued, "you will surrender your hospital badge to the security guards at the door. You will leave this room unemployed, uninsured, and facing a massive federal inquiry. My legal team will hand your files directly to the authorities waiting outside." The tension in the room skyrocketed. Highly educated, incredibly wealthy professionals were openly weeping, gripping the armrests of their chairs as they stared up at the giant screen, praying for their names to turn green. They were completely trapped in a cage of their own making. Hannah stepped up beside me, resting a steady, supportive hand on my shoulder. She looked out at the terrified crowd, then back at me, a fierce pride shining in her eyes. "You really did it, Caroline," she whispered. "You burned their entire fake empire to the ground." I watched a name on the screen flash a brilliant, bloody red. A doctor in the fifth row let out a loud sob of despair as a security guard immediately approached his seat. "I am just getting started," I whispered back to my sister. Just then, my personal phone vibrated in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an urgent text message from the front desk security team. I read the notification and a fresh wave of adrenaline coursed through my veins. The dominoes were falling faster than I anticipated. Jamal noticed my expression. He leaned in close. "What is it?" I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked at Jamal and Hannah with a cold, triumphant glint in my eye. "The police have Cameron in custody downstairs," I said quietly. "But that is not why security texted me. My mother just tried to flee the parking garage, but her credit cards were declined at the exit gate. She is demanding to speak to me. It seems Brenda finally realizes she is entirely out of options." I turned to Director Harrison and handed him the master control tablet for the auditing software. "The room is yours, Director," I said clearly. "Ensure every corrupt physician is stripped of their credentials before the police arrive for the secondary arrests." Harrison stepped up to the center of the stage. He gripped the edges of the mahogany podium tightly. For years, he had been forced to bow to my father's wealth, forced to look the other way, while Cameron endangered lives. Now the invisible chains holding him back were completely shattered. His official entrance into absolute authority cast a deafening silence over the entire auditorium. You could hear the low hum of the ventilation system. the collective breath of 500 medical professionals caught in their throats. On the massive projector screen behind him, the final progress bars of the audit completed their scans. A harsh, bright red light illuminated the faces of the audience as 32 distinct names flashed across the display. 32 senior doctors, administrators, and department heads who had actively participated in Cameron's medical fraud. Director Harrison looked out at the sea of terrified faces. His voice carried the weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. For a decade, this hospital prioritized profits over patients, Harrison announced. His words struck the room like physical blows. You allowed arrogance and bribery to dictate surgical outcomes. You watched an incompetent man play God with human lives, and you eagerly held out your hands for the hush money. That era is dead. If your name is currently glowing red on that screen, your access to Oak Ridge General is permanently revoked. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a deafening, suffocating quiet. No one protested. No one shouted about their tenure or their legal rights. The sheer magnitude of their exposure paralyzed them completely. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium opened slightly, allowing a squad of local police officers to step inside. They carried stacks of warrants provided directly by my corporate legal team. The purge had officially begun. I did not need to watch the arrests. I had already secured the victory. I nodded to Jamal and Hannah. We turned and walked down the side stairs, exiting through the private administrative doors. We left the ruined doctors to face the consequences of their greed. We walked down the sterile white hallway toward the executive elevator. Jamal checked his secure financial monitor on his phone. He offered a sharp, satisfied smile. The asset seizures are fully synchronized, Jamal reported. The bank just confirmed the absolute freeze on Richard's primary accounts. They triggered the cascading locks on all supplementary credit lines. Brenda's platinum cards are completely dead. She currently has zero purchasing power. Good, I replied evenly. Let us go explain the new reality to her. We stepped into the elevator and descended to the VIP parking garage. The polished steel doors slid open to reveal a cavernous, dimly lit concrete expanse. The immediate sound of a blaring car horn echoed aggressively off the gray walls. My mother was trapped inside her massive luxury SUV. She was laying her hand flat against the steering wheel horn, screaming through the closed window at a terrified young parking attendant. The heavy metal barrier gate remained stubbornly lowered, blocking her exit to the street. We approached the vehicle at a measured, deliberate pace. Two of my private security guards were already standing near the attendant booth. They stepped aside respectfully as I walked up. Brenda shoved her car door open. She stumbled out, nearly twisting her ankle in her designer heels. Her carefully sprayed hair was beginning to unravel. Her face was flushed with a frantic, unhinged rage. She marched toward the parking attendant, raising her hand as if she fully intended to slap him across the face. Do not even think about it, Jamal warned. His deep voice instantly halted her hand in midair. You lay one finger on that hospital employee, and I will personally ensure the police add assault and battery to your growing list of legal problems today. Brenda whipped her head around. She glared at Jamal, then shifted her furious gaze to me. Her chest heaved with exertion. She tried desperately to summon her usual haughty country club demeanor, but the sheer panic in her eyes betrayed her completely. Caroline, tell this incompetent fool to raise the gate, Brenda demanded. She pointed a trembling finger at the attendant. The machine is broken. My credit cards are malfunctioning due to some ridiculous bank error. Pay my parking fee and tell them to let me leave immediately. I have a severe migraine and I need to go home. I stood entirely still. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire childhood making me feel small, worthless, and invisible. I looked at the mother who had thrown me out of my own home 10 years ago to protect a thief. It is not a bank error, Mom, I said. My voice was as cold as the concrete floor beneath our feet. Your accounts are empty. The joint checking accounts, the offshore trusts, the emergency corporate credit lines. Everything was tied to Richard's assets. And as Jamal explicitly explained upstairs, those assets have been legally seized to cover the massive malpractice liabilities your golden child generated. You do not have a migraine. You have a total financial collapse. Brenda shook her head in rapid, jerky movements. Her denial was absolute. No, you are lying. Richard will call the bank governor. He plays golf with the board of directors. He will have this sorted out by dinner. You cannot touch our money. Richard is currently in the back of a police cruiser. Hannah spoke up, her voice holding zero sympathy. He assaulted a security guard and tried to incite a riot. He is not calling anyone from a holding cell, Mom. It is over. The money is gone. Brenda staggered backward until her spine hit the side of her SUV. She gripped the door handle like a lifeline. The reality of the situation was finally breaching her ironclad delusion. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden desperate terror. "You owe us!" Brenda gasped, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head. You cannot leave your own mother stranded in a parking garage. You have to give me my money back." "I did not take a single piece of your money, Brenda," I replied, stripping away the title of mother permanently. "The courts took it. The victims Cameron paralyzed took it. I simply provided the evidence. You chose to build your empire on a foundation of lies and stolen research. Now you get to live in the ruins." I turned to the parking attendant. He was watching the exchange with wide, fearful eyes. "Raise the gate," I instructed the young man. "Let her leave. She will need to save whatever gasoline is left in that tank. She cannot afford to refill it." The attendant quickly hit the release button. The heavy metal barrier slowly lifted, clearing the path to the street. Brenda stared at the open gate, then stared back at me. Her lips trembled as she tried to formulate one final insult, one last attempt to assert dominance. But there was nothing left. The golden child was exposed. The wealth was gone. The fake legacy was obliterated. I turned my back on her and began walking away. Jamal and Hannah fell into step beside me. I did not look back to see Brenda climb into her car. I did not watch her drive away into a life of absolute ruin. I simply walked toward the bright sunlight pouring in from the garage entrance, completely free from the shadows of my past. The warm air hit my face, but my moment of absolute tranquility was brief. Jamal's phone buzzed sharply in his hand. He looked down at the encrypted screen, his sharp legal mind instantly shifting back into battle mode. He tapped a few keys, his jaw tightening. "Caroline, we have one final loose end," Jamal said. He handed me the device. "Your father's closest allies on the former board of trustees are refusing to accept the dissolution." Chairman Maxwell just convened an emergency shareholder meeting at the downtown corporate headquarters. He filed a preliminary injunction attempting to freeze the MedTech Innovations acquisition. He is claiming you coerced Director Harrison and manipulated the financial transfer. I handed the phone back to my brother-in-law. The sheer audacity of these men was almost entertaining. They had fed off my father's bribes for a decade, and they were desperately trying to protect their corrupt ecosystem. "Hannah," I said, turning to my sister, "stay here and coordinate with the transition team. Make sure the surgical wing is fully locked down and that Cameron's victims are assigned to competent specialists immediately." Hannah nodded fiercely. "Go finish them, Caroline." Jamal and I stepped into the sleek black town car waiting at the curb. The drive to the downtown corporate headquarters took less than 20 minutes, but I spent every second preparing for the final execution of their fake legacy. Chairman Maxwell was a ruthless old money billionaire who had always viewed my father as a useful wallet. He was the architect behind the scenes, the man who had officially rubber-stamped my brother's fraudulent residency applications 10 years ago. We strode into the towering glass skyscraper. The lobby security guards moved to intercept us, but Jamal simply flashed his tablet. The screen displayed the federal acquisition documents complete with the digital seal of the highest court in the state. The guards immediately stepped aside, clearing our path to the private executive elevator. When we reached the penthouse level, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom were closed. Muffled shouting echoed from inside. I did not knock. I simply pushed the doors open with both hands, letting them slam against the walls with a resounding crack. The massive boardroom table was surrounded by 20 furious, wealthy men and women. At the head of the table stood Chairman Maxwell, his face purple with rage. He was aggressively pointing a pen at Director Harrison, who stood calmly at the opposite end of the room. "You will sign this affidavit," Harrison Maxwell roared, entirely ignoring my dramatic entrance. "You will state on the record that this rogue acquisition is completely invalid." Richard Reed is a cornerstone of this hospital network. I will not allow some useless, unstable college dropout to march in here and steal our infrastructure just because she holds a petty family grudge. I walked slowly into the room. My charcoal blazer cut a sharp, unyielding silhouette against the polished mahogany walls. Jamal walked right beside me, radiating the calm, lethal confidence of a top-tier financial attorney preparing to dismantle his prey. The only thing being stolen in this network is the money you have been siphoning from patient care funds, Maxwell, I stated. My voice was icy, commanding the immediate attention of every single board member. Maxwell whipped his head around. He glared at me with absolute contempt. How did you get past security? This is a closed executive session. You have no business being here, Caroline. Your parents warned me you were having a mental breakdown. I know you dropped out of medical school 10 years ago. You are nothing but a disappointment trying to extort money from your successful brother. He genuinely believed the lie. My mother and father had spun their toxic narrative so perfectly that even the chairman of the board thought I was just a bitter, unemployed failure. He had absolutely no idea that I held the patent to the very technology keeping his surgical departments afloat. I did not drop out. I corrected him smoothly. I was forced out by a corrupt board of admissions that you personally oversaw. You accepted my father's bribes to push Cameron through the program, fully aware he lacked the spatial reasoning and academic integrity to be a surgeon. You built your entire administrative career on fraud. Maxwell slammed his hands on the table. You insolent brat, I will have you arrested for defamation. Director Harrison, do your job. Call the police and have this vagrant removed from my boardroom immediately. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still at the center of the room. I did not argue with the furious old man. I simply looked at Director Harrison and gave him a single subtle nod. This was the moment. The absolute destruction of the old guard. Director Harrison did not reach for the phone. He did not call security. Instead, he picked up the emergency affidavit Maxwell had been trying to force him to sign. With a swift, deliberate motion, Harrison tore the legal document entirely in half. He dropped the shredded paper onto the polished table. He then stepped away from his designated chair, turned his entire body toward me, and executed a deep, respectful bow. It was a gesture of total submission, performed in front of the most powerful people in the city. I cannot remove her chairman, Maxwell. Director Harrison announced. His voice was steady and carried the absolute weight of federal law. Because you no longer have the authority to issue commands in this building. The acquisition has been verified by the National Registry. Please show some respect. You are standing in the presence of Dr. Caroline Reed, the new majority shareholder, and the official chief medical officer of the Oak Ridge Health System. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was a suffocating, terrifying quiet. 20 board members stared at me in pure shock. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The useless dropout they had mocked for a decade was not just a doctor. I was their boss. I owned the building they were sitting in. Chief Medical Officer Maxwell gasped. He collapsed into his leather chair, the arrogance completely draining from his eyes. That is impossible. You do not have the capital. You do not have the credentials. I have a dual board certification from Johns Hopkins, I replied coldly. And I have the unredacted financial audit that Jamal finalized this morning. The audit that proves you personally embezzled $4 million from the Pediatric Research Fund. I watched the horror consume Maxwell's face as the true consequences of my arrival finally set in. Jamal slid the unredacted financial audit across the polished mahogany table. The heavy paper slapped against the wood, sliding directly into Maxwell's trembling hands. The document detailed every single offshore wire transfer, every shell company, and every fake charitable grant the chairman had used to funnel money out of the Pediatric Research Fund. You have two choices right now, Maxwell. Jamal stated, his voice a low, lethal hum that commanded the room. You can step down immediately and quietly surrender your shares to MedTech Innovations. Or I can walk these documents down to the federal prosecutor waiting in the lobby. You will spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. Maxwell opened his mouth to argue, but the heavy boardroom doors swung open again, interrupting his desperate defense. Two local police officers stepped into the room, tightly gripping the arms of my father. Richard Reed was no longer the arrogant patriarch who commanded high society. His expensive suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, his silk tie was completely undone, and his hands were secured behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. Right behind the officers was my mother. Brenda had apparently abandoned her stalled luxury SUV in the parking garage, bypassing the security desk in a frantic sprint to find my father. She was clutching a thick crystal water glass she must have grabbed from the executive reception area, desperately trying to soothe her escalating panic attack. Her face was flushed, her makeup smeared, and her eyes wild with entitlement. Chairman Maxwell Richard shouted the moment he crossed the threshold. He completely ignored the severe circumstances of his own arrest. He still believed his vast wealth made him invincible. Tell these incompetent officers to release me immediately. Call the police commissioner. I am a major shareholder and a top donor. My daughter is having a psychotic episode and trying to frame me for bank fraud. I demand you fix this. Brenda nodded frantically, stepping up beside her handcuffed husband. She gripped the crystal water glass tightly, her knuckles turning white. "This is an outrage," she shrieked, looking at the board members for sympathy. "Caroline hired these fake security guards to harass us. She is trying to ruin Cameron's promotion. Chairman, you know us, you know our family, you know Cameron is a brilliant surgeon. Put a stop to this." The 20 board members stared at my parents in absolute silence. No one offered a reassuring smile. No one stepped forward to help. They were looking at Richard and Brenda as if they were already dead. Maxwell slowly stood up from his leather chair. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, but that hatred was no longer directed at me. He locked his furious gaze on my father. "You absolute fool!" Maxwell spat, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "You brought this plague into my boardroom. You told me your daughter was a harmless, useless dropout. You told me nobody would ever look into the origins of Cameron's research algorithm." Richard blinked, entirely confused by the chairman's hostile reaction. "What are you talking about? She is useless. She is trying to extort us. Just call the bank and authorize my $2 million transfer so we can fire her." "She owns the bank account!" Richard Maxwell roared, slamming his fists down on the mahogany table. "She owns the research subsidiary. She holds the patent to the software your idiot son has been using to butcher patients. Caroline Reed just acquired a 60% controlling stake in this entire health network. She is the chief medical officer, and she just handed me the proof of our financial arrangements. You ruined us." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Brenda's eyes widened to the size of saucers. She stared at Maxwell, the highest social and professional authority she recognized as the undeniable truth finally breached her ironclad delusion. She could dismiss my words. She could ignore Jamal's legal threats. But hearing the chairman of the board confirm my absolute dominance shattered her entire reality. The heavy crystal water glass slipped from Brenda's manicured, trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the floor, crashing violently against the polished hardwood. The sharp, concussive sound of the shattering glass echoed off the walls. Water and sharp crystalline shards exploded across the expensive Persian rug, splashing against her designer heels. Brenda did not even look down. Her knees gave out and she collapsed directly onto the wet glass-covered floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her pristine high society facade was completely annihilated. "No," Richard whispered. He shook his head in rapid, jerky movements, fighting against the police officers holding his arms. His absolute denial was a desperate defense mechanism. "No, that is impossible. She has no money. She has no power. I am Richard Reed. I dictate what happens in this city." I walked slowly toward my father. The sound of my heels clicking against the floor was the only noise in the boardroom, besides my mother's wretched sobbing. I stopped just inches away from him, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had traded my future to protect a thief. "You dictate nothing, Richard," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. 10 years ago you locked me in your office and told me that my medical career was collateral damage. You told me that Cameron's legacy was the only thing that mattered. You used your money to silence me, and you thought I would just disappear into the shadows and accept my role as the family failure. Richard stared at me, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. The reality of his complete financial and social ruin was finally crushing his monumental ego. I did not disappear. I continued mercilessly. I built an empire. I designed the technology that hospitals across the globe rely on. I accumulated the capital to buy the very institution you tried to banish me from. I did not just survive your betrayal, Dad. I monetized it. Hannah stepped forward, standing proudly beside me. She looked down at our mother weeping on the floor, then up at our father in handcuffs. You chose a fake legacy over your real daughters, Hannah said, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. You spent a decade lying to everyone in this room, pretending you had a perfect family. But the truth always comes out. Caroline just brought the receipts. Jamal crossed his arms, offering Richard a sharp, victorious smile. The police are here to transfer you to the federal holding facility, Richard. Your accounts are permanently frozen. Your assets are seized to pay for Cameron's malpractice victims. You will be assigned a public defender because you literally cannot afford private counsel. I turned my attention to the police officers. Officers, please remove this man from my hospital. He is trespassing on private property. The officers nodded respectfully to me. They gripped Richard's arms tighter and forced him to turn around. My father did not shout anymore. He did not issue any more empty threats. He walked toward the boardroom doors with his head hung low, an utterly broken man stripped of everything he valued. Brenda remained on the floor, kneeling among the shattered crystal. She reached a trembling hand toward me. Caroline, please, she whimpered, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. I am your mother. You cannot do this to us. We are blood. I looked down at her without a single ounce of pity. Blood simply determines who you are related to, Brenda. It does not dictate who you are obligated to tolerate. You made your choice 10 years ago. Now you get to live with the consequences. I gestured to the two remaining security guards stationed by the door. They stepped forward, hauled my sobbing mother off the shattered glass, and escorted her out of the boardroom. Her cries faded down the hallway, leaving an immaculate silence in her wake. I turned my sharp attention back to the 20 board members who were still frozen in their expensive leather chairs. They were the architects of my misery, the enablers who had rubber-stamped Cameron's fraudulent career in exchange for my father's massive financial kickbacks. Now they were just terrified employees waiting for the axe to fall. Let us make one thing perfectly clear, I announced, my voice carrying absolute authority. Oak Ridge General Hospital is no longer a playground for the rich to buy prestige. As of this morning, MedTech Innovations holds a 60% controlling interest in this entire healthcare network. I am not just the chief medical officer. I am the true owner of this facility. The era of covering up medical malpractice to protect wealthy donors ends today. Chairman Maxwell opened his mouth to loudly protest, but Jamal quickly cut him off instantly. He dropped a thick stack of legal binders onto the center of the mahogany table. These are your severance agreements, Jamal stated smoothly. As part of the acquisition, the current board of trustees is officially dissolved. Your administrative privileges have already been revoked. If you sign these documents today, you will walk away with a standard exit package. If you refuse, or if you attempt to legally challenge Dr. Reed's ownership, we will forward the unredacted financial audits directly to the federal prosecutor. We have documented every single bribe, every falsified patient record, and every offshore transfer. The board members stared at the binders as if they were venomous snakes. They had spent decades building an impenetrable fortress of wealth and influence. They thought they were untouchable. Now, they realized I had bought the ground right out from under them. You have exactly 5 minutes to sign those papers, I said, looking directly at Maxwell. After that, my security team will escort you out of my building. You will leave your access badges on this table. You will not return to your offices. You will not touch another computer terminal in this network. Maxwell's hands shook with defeated rage. He reached for the pen resting in front of him. One by one, the other board members followed suit. The rapid scratching of ink pens on crisp paper was the only distinct sound remaining in the room. They were signing away their power, their prestige, and their corrupt legacy. When the final signature was complete, I collected the binders. I looked at the broken men and women who had once tried to destroy my life. "Get out of my hospital immediately," I commanded with absolute coldness. They stood up in complete silence, stripped entirely of their foolish pride, and walked out the heavy oak door. The boardroom and hospital empire were finally mine. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, letting the profound silence wash over me. Jamal closed the legal binders and packed them into his leather briefcase with a satisfying snap. Hannah walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the sprawling city skyline. "We actually did it," she said quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet. There is one last conversation I need to have before the police transport vehicles leave the loading dock." I turned and walked out of the executive suite. Jamal and Hannah followed me back to the private elevator. We rode down to the sub-basement holding area. The sterile concrete walls of the lower level were lined with local police officers finalizing their paperwork. Officer Davies stood guarding the temporary holding room. He straightened his posture the absolute moment he saw me approaching. "Dr. Reed," Officer Davies said respectfully, "the suspect is secured inside. The transport vans are waiting for your final authorization to move him to the downtown precinct. Give me 5 minutes alone with him," I ordered. Davies unlocked the heavy metal door and stepped aside. I walked into the stark fluorescent-lit room. Cameron was sitting handcuffed to a metal bench. His pristine white lab coat was gone. He looked pathetic. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands were shaking violently against the steel restraints. When he heard my heels click against the concrete floor, he looked up. "Caroline, please," Cameron sobbed. His broken voice echoed off the bare walls. "You made your point. You took everything. The hospital, the money, the family legacy. Just tell the police to drop the criminal charges. I will leave the state today. I will never practice medicine again. I promise." I pulled up a metal folding chair and sat directly across from him. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees. I looked closely at the golden child who had brazenly stolen my future 10 years ago. "This is not about making a point, Cameron," I stated coldly. "This is about extracting the absolute truth. You are going to tell me exactly how you executed the theft of my biomedical thesis. I want every single detail right now." "I do not know what you want me to say." He panicked, pulling frantically against his steel cuffs. "I was failing my residency exams. Dad told me to take your laptop. He said you were just a girl and your career did not matter as much as mine. He hired a tech specialist to break your encryption passwords." My blood ran ice cold. Richard had not just covered up the theft. He had actively orchestrated the burglary of my apartment. "Tell me the name of the tech specialist," I demanded. My tone left zero room for hesitation. "If you lie to me right now, I will personally ensure the federal prosecutor seeks the absolute maximum sentence." Cameron swallowed hard. He looked terrified. "It was an external security contractor named Victor Cole," Cameron choked out. His voice was a pathetic whisper echoing in the sterile concrete holding room. "Dad paid him $50,000 in cash to bypass your laptop firewall while you were attending a weekend seminar. He copied the entire drive onto a flash drive and handed it directly to me in the hospital parking lot. I spent 3 weeks changing the author tags and rewriting the introduction so the admissions board would never suspect it was yours." I stared at him, feeling a deep, dark satisfaction wash over me. For a decade, my parents had gaslighted me into believing I was crazy paranoid and making up stories to cover my own academic failures. Hearing the actual mechanics of their betrayal spoken aloud finally closed the loop on my past. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. The edges were worn, the paper slightly yellowed from age. I dropped it onto the metal table between us. The heavy slap of the file made Cameron jump in his seat. "This is the 10-year file," I announced coldly. "I started compiling this the exact morning I realized my thesis was missing. Inside this folder is the original digital footprint of my biomedical mapping algorithm. It contains the raw code, the time-stamped server backups I uploaded to my personal cloud, and the original copyright registration I filed 6 months before you ever presented my work to the residency board." Cameron stared at the thick folder as if it were an explosive device rigged to detonate. "You knew," he stammered, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "You had the absolute proof this entire time. Why did you not just show this to the hospital board 10 years ago? Because 10 years ago, I was a 24-year-old student with no money and zero legal representation. I explained. My voice remained perfectly level, betraying no emotion. Dad owned the admissions committee. He owned the local judges. He would have dragged me into a brutal legal battle, drained my resources, and painted me as a delusional dropout trying to extort her successful family. I knew presenting this evidence back then would only result in my own destruction. So I walked away. I took my genius, I moved across the country, and I waited until I possessed enough financial power to ensure that when I finally dropped this file on a table, nobody could ever protect you again. I slid the folder closer to his handcuffed hands. The top page displayed his fraudulent residency application, right next to my original legally certified code. "You built an entire life on my foundation, Cameron," I said mercilessly. "You wore the white coat, you collected the massive paychecks, and you accepted the endless praise from our toxic parents. But you never actually possessed the intellect required to sustain the lie." "Please," Cameron begged again, fresh tears streaming down his face. "I will give you all the money back. I will publicly apologize. Just do not give that file to the federal authorities." I stood up from the metal folding chair. I looked down at the broken man who had stolen my youth. "I am not here to negotiate a refund," I stated. "I am here to execute a complete and total liquidation of your fake legacy." Jamal stepped into the holding room. He closed the heavy metal door behind him, sealing us inside. He placed a second, much thinner folder on the table right next to the 10-year file. This new folder bore the crisp, minimalist logo of MedTech Innovations. "You see," Cameron Jamal began, his deep voice filling the sterile space. "Caroline did not just sit on that original code, she refined it, she perfected it, and then she patented it under a highly protected corporate structure." I opened the MedTech folder and spread the documents out so my brother could clearly read the federal seals. "When you stole my prototype," I explained coldly, "you stole a beta version of a neural mapping sequence. You presented it to the Oak Ridge Medical Board as a finished product. But you failed to comprehend the fundamental mathematics driving the algorithm. My software was designed to learn to adapt to the unique neuroplasticity of each individual patient. It required a secondary authentication key to process live surgical data. A key you did not have because you never wrote the code." Cameron stared at the patent documents. His breath hitched as the dense legal and technical jargon validated his absolute worst fears. "I bypassed the authentication," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad hired another contractor to strip out the error warnings so the software would boot up in the operating room. We thought it was just a generic security feature." "You bypassed a critical safety protocol," I corrected him sharply. "You actively disabled the very mechanism designed to stop the surgical laser if it miscalculated a neural pathway. That is why your patient suffered severe nerve damage last week. The algorithm attempted to recalibrate, hit the broken firewall you created, and defaulted to a catastrophic error state. You did not just commit academic fraud, Cameron. You committed premeditated medical battery." "I did not know," Cameron cried out, thrashing violently against his handcuffs. The metal restraints clanged loudly against the bench. "I swear to you, Carrie, I did not know it would hurt anyone. Dad told me the software was fine. He said the board approved it. He said I was ready." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for a surgeon," Jamal stated without a shred of sympathy. "As the attending physician, you hold the ultimate liability. But it gets substantially worse for you from a financial and criminal standpoint." Jamal leaned over the table, planting his large hands firmly on the metal surface to command Cameron's full attention. "You did not just use the software," Jamal continued. "You monetized it. Over the past 5 years, you gave lectures on this mapping technique. You accepted prestigious medical grants based on its success. You billed insurance companies millions of dollars for procedures utilizing a stolen patented technology. Under federal law, that constitutes massive intellectual property theft, wire fraud, and healthcare fraud." Cameron stopped thrashing. His body went entirely rigid. He looked at Jamal, his eyes wide with a hollow, consuming terror. "Federal fraud. Every single dollar you billed, using medtech property, is legally considered stolen revenue," I added mercilessly. "My corporate legal team has already filed a federal injunction. We are seizing all of your personal assets to cover the intellectual property infringement. Your house in the suburbs, your luxury vehicles, your investment portfolios. We have already initiated the legal process to freeze your bank accounts, intercept your stock dividends, and lay claim to any future earnings you might somehow manage to acquire. They are all gone, Cameron. I am taking every single thing you bought with my genius, down to the very last cent. You will leave this facility with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and the criminal charges waiting for you at the precinct. A guttural sob ripped through Cameron's throat. He slumped forward, resting his forehead against the cold metal table. His perfectly tailored persona had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, incompetent man who finally realized he was entirely out of options. "You are destroying my life," Cameron wept. His tears soaked into the manila folders resting on the table. "You took the hospital. You took Dad's money. Now you are taking my freedom. We are supposed to be blood. How can you be so cold?" I looked down at his shaking shoulders. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I only felt the profound, crystal-clear satisfaction of absolute justice. "I am not cold, Cameron," I replied evenly. "I am precise. You and our parents built a toxic ecosystem that thrived on my destruction. You happily watched me get thrown out onto the street. You smiled while Mom and Dad actively sabotaged my early career prospects. You slept perfectly well in your expensive house knowing it was funded by my stolen thesis. You never cared about blood when you were the one holding the knife." I stood up from the folding chair. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long, sharp shadows across the concrete floor. "I am leaving now," I told him. "The police transport vans are waiting at the loading dock. They will take you to the downtown precinct, where you will be formally booked and processed. I highly suggest you cooperate with the federal investigators. If you try to protect Dad, or if you try to deny your involvement in the software manipulation, my lawyers will push for the maximum possible sentence." Cameron did not lift his head. He just continued to sob, his body shaking with the violent tremors of a man whose entire existence had just been systematically dismantled. Jamal gathered the folders from the table, ensuring the pristine medtech documents were safely tucked away. He looked down at Cameron one last time, shaking his head in sheer disgust. "You played a very dangerous game, Dr. Reed," Jamal said quietly. "But you forgot the most important rule: never steal from someone smarter than you." I turned my back on my brother. I walked toward the heavy metal door, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete. I did not look back. I had spent 10 years looking back, analyzing every cruel word, every unfair comparison, every stolen opportunity. That era was permanently over. Officer Davies opened the door from the outside, standing at strict attention as Jamal and I stepped out of the holding room. The squad of local police officers immediately moved past us, entering the room to unhook Cameron from the bench and prepare him for transport. "Dr. Reed," Officer Davies said, handing me a small sealed envelope. "Director Harrison asked me to give this to you immediately. The preliminary purge of the medical staff is complete. The board members have surrendered their badges and vacated the premises. The facility is officially secure under your command." I took the envelope, a genuine smile finally touching my face. "Excellent work, Officer Davies," I replied smoothly. "Ensure the transport goes smoothly. I want absolutely no delays or complications during his transfer to the downtown holding facility. Keep the press away from the loading dock if possible, but do not intervene if they manage to get photographs. Let the public see exactly what happens to corrupt physicians who violate their sworn oaths. We have a massive cleanup ahead of us today." I turned to Jamal as we walked down the secure administrative corridor. The executive wing was entirely deserted, the former board members having fled the premises in absolute disgrace. Jamal pushed open the frosted glass doors to the chief financial officer's suite. He had commandeered this room early this morning, transforming it into our legal and financial war room. Inside, his encrypted laptop was already connected to the massive wall-mounted monitors. The screen was split into several secure video conferencing grids. On the line were 3 senior executives from Liberty National Bank, the primary lender for my father's real estate firm, along with 2 lead investigators from the Federal Financial Crimes Division. "It is time to drop the final hammer," Jamal stated smoothly. He loosened his silk tie and took his place at the head of the conference table. Richard thinks his arrest today is the worst thing that can happen to him. He still believes his lawyers can post bail and salvage his corporate assets. He does not realize the very donation he used to bribe the hospital board is a radioactive bomb. I took a seat beside him watching my brother-in-law work. Jamal was a master at forensic accounting, as a brilliant legal mind who had overcome endless systemic hurdles. He could trace a single dirty dollar through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies without breaking a sweat. Gentleman Jamal addressed the executives and federal agents on the screen. His voice resonated with absolute authority. Thank you for standing by. As you are aware, Richard Reed was taken into police custody 45 minutes ago on charges of assaulting a security officer and attempting to incite a riot. However, the physical altercation is merely a footnote. I am officially submitting the unredacted financial audit of Oak Ridge General Hospital into federal evidence. Jamal hit a key on his laptop. Massive spreadsheets and banking logs flooded the presentation screens. Let us examine the $2 million charitable donation Mr. Reed wired to the hospital research subsidiary yesterday afternoon, Jamal continued. Richard claimed this was a philanthropic endeavor. The reality is that this was a desperate, highly illegal capital transfer. My forensic team tracked the origin of those funds. Richard did not use liquid cash. He leveraged the primary commercial mortgages of his 3 largest residential development projects to secure a rapid line of credit from Liberty National. The bank executives on the video call immediately paled. Their pristine corporate composure cracked as they stared at the highlighted routing numbers. You are telling us he committed loan fraud to secure those funds? One of the bank vice presidents demanded, his voice tight with rising panic. I am telling you, he committed federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to bribe a medical board. Jamal corrected sharply. Richard used that $2 million loan to buy silence. He paid off the hospital administrators to ignore the fact that his son Cameron was actively maiming patients using stolen, uncalibrated surgical software. But the corruption goes much deeper. Jamal pulled up a secondary schematic on the monitors. It linked Richard's real estate firm directly to the private bank accounts of the now ousted hospital board members. Richard has been operating ghost clinics in his commercial properties, I explained, stepping into the conversation. My voice was cold and surgical. He offered the hospital board members free commercial rent in his luxury buildings. In exchange, they funneled lucrative state-funded medical grants back into his real estate firm under the guise of community health investments. He used public healthcare money to artificially inflate his company's valuation. The federal investigators on the screen leaned forward, their expressions turning predatory. They were looking at a slam-dunk racketeering case. And here's the fatal consequence of his arrogance, Jamal announced, delivering the final crushing blow. Because Richard used fraudulently obtained commercial loans to pay a medical bribe, and because those funds were deposited into a subsidiary account, now legally owned by MedTech Innovations, that $2 million is officially classified as tainted capital. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, my client, Dr. Caroline Reed, has legally seized that money to establish a victim compensation fund for the patients Cameron paralyzed. A heavy, terrified silence fell over the video conference. The money is gone, Jamal stated with absolute finality. Richard Reed cannot repay the loan he took out yesterday. His debt-to-income ratio has completely collapsed. His commercial properties are tied to federal racketeering charges. His entire real estate portfolio is built on a foundation of medical fraud. The senior bank executive wiped a layer of sweat from his upper lip. He looked at his colleagues, realizing the massive exposure their institution now faced. We have to trigger the default clauses immediately, the executive ordered, panic entirely consuming his voice. Call our legal department. I want every single commercial loan attached to Richard Reed called in by the end of the business day. Freeze his operational accounts. Lock down his personal wealth management portfolios. Seize the residential properties before the federal government places a lien on them. Do exactly what you have to do, Jamal replied cheerfully. But I suggest you act fast. The federal prosecutors are currently drafting the federal indictments. By tomorrow morning, Richard Reed will be labeled a hostile financial entity. Jamal terminated the video connection. The massive screens faded to black, leaving the executive suite in profound silence. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his leather chair, a look of profound satisfaction settling across his features. "It is done," Jamal said quietly. He looked at me with deep respect. "The bank will strip his company down to the copper wiring by midnight. The federal agents will seize whatever is left to pay the fines. Richard and Brenda are entirely bankrupt. They have no homes, no credit, no social standing, and no future. You surgically removed their entire empire." I looked out the large glass window of the executive suite, watching the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the hospital campus. The toxic legacy that had suffocated me for 10 years was officially dead. I did not feel a single ounce of remorse. "Let us go find Hannah," I said, my voice steady and completely at peace. "It is time to finally end this day." We exited the executive suite and navigated the quiet corridors toward the main administrative hub. Hannah was waiting by the reception desk. She held a thick stack of certified mail receipts and a digital tablet displaying live updates from the hospital communication network. "The purge is completely finished," Hannah announced with a fierce, satisfied smile. "Every corrupt doctor whose name turned red in the auditorium has been escorted off the premises. The remaining staff are already preparing for the mandatory compliance briefings scheduled for tomorrow morning." "Excellent work," I replied smoothly. "But we are not entirely finished with Cameron yet. The criminal charges are currently pending with the local police, but I want his medical license permanently eradicated before the sun sets." I approached the main reception desk and picked up the secure direct line to the National Medical Ethics Board. As the Chief Medical Officer of Oak Ridge General, I held the absolute authority to initiate an emergency license revocation. The automated system routed my call directly to the Regional Director of Compliance. "Director Hughes," I stated clearly into the receiver. "This is Dr. Caroline Reed, the new majority shareholder of the Oak Ridge Health System. I am officially submitting an emergency referral for the immediate and permanent revocation of Dr. Cameron Reed medical license. I have already forwarded an unredacted audit to your secure server. It details a 40% surgical failure rate, systematic falsification of patient consent forms, and deliberate intellectual property theft, involving unauthorized neuromapping software." The regional director gasped audibly over the line. "Dr. Reed, these are catastrophic allegations. If this data is verified by our team, his license will be suspended within the hour, pending a permanent nationwide ban." "The data is completely verified," I assured him coldly. "The local authorities currently have him in custody for attempted corporate sabotage. Ensure the revocation is public. I want his name heavily flagged in every single medical database across the country. He will never operate in any capacity again." I placed the receiver back on its base with a sharp click. The final nail in Cameron's professional coffin was firmly secured. He was no longer a pioneer. He was a permanent cautionary tale. Jamal's phone vibrated intensely in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, his sharp eyes scanning a rapid influx of encrypted text messages from his financial informants downtown. The dominoes were falling much faster than we had calculated. "Richard bankruptcy is no longer just imminent," Jamal declared, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It is actively happening right now in real time. Liberty National Bank just dispatched a repossession team to his primary residence in the suburbs. They are towing the luxury vehicles right out of the driveway and changing the heavy locks on the front doors. Brenda is currently standing on the sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on her back, screaming at the repo men." Hannah let out a sharp, victorious laugh. She looked at me, the years of shared family trauma finally dissolving from her shoulders. "They literally have nowhere to go," Hannah said. "The country club revoked their elite membership the second the wire fraud news leaked. Their wealthy friends are entirely ghosting them to avoid association. They are utterly destitute." I looked at the digital tablet resting on the reception desk. The hospital network was rapidly stabilizing. The infection had been surgically excised. My family thought they could bury me in their shadows, but they forgot that extreme pressure creates diamonds. I survived their relentless cruelty, and I effectively weaponized their betrayal. "Caroline, please, you have to help me," Brenda wailed into the receiver. Her voice was stripped of all its high society polish, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of a cornered animal. The loud sound of heavy city traffic roared in the background. They locked me out of my own house. I am standing on the sidewalk in the cold. I do not have a single dollar to my name. Richard is in a jail cell and Cameron is not answering his phone. You are my daughter. You have to come pick me up right now. I looked at Hannah. My younger sister just shook her head, her face set in absolute stone. I am not a taxi service, Brenda. I replied, my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any sympathy. And I am certainly not your safety net. You spent 10 years building a luxurious life out of my stolen assets. Call one of your wealthy country club friends for a ride. They blocked my number! Brenda sobbed, her panic escalating into a hysterical pitch. Nobody will talk to me. The news is everywhere online. They are calling us thieves and frauds. Caroline, I am your mother. I gave you life. I raised you. You cannot leave me on the street like a stray dog. Blood is thicker than water. You owe me your respect and your financial support. It was the classic textbook manipulation. The final desperate pull of the invisible strings she had used to control our family for decades. She honestly believed that throwing the word mother into the conversation would instantly erase years of psychological abuse, stolen research, and blatant gaslighting. You gave birth to me, Brenda, I stated coldly, completely immune to her theatrics. But you never acted like a mother. A mother protects her children. A mother does not help her golden child steal her daughter's intellectual property. A mother does not lie to her friends and say her daughter had a severe mental breakdown just to protect her own fragile ego. You only remember that we are blood when your bank accounts hit zero. I did it for the family, Brenda cried out, trying to spin a narrative that no longer existed. I was trying to secure our legacy. Richard said Cameron needed the boost to get his residency. We were going to make it up to you eventually. You have to believe me. I love you. Do not use that word. I snapped, my voice slicing through the speaker like a surgical scalpel. Do not ever use the word love to describe your greed. You did not love me. You loved the prestige my stolen work brought to your son. You loved the money my father threw at you. Now all of that is gone. Your husband is facing federal prison. Your son is stripped of his medical license. You are entirely bankrupt. That is your legacy. You are a monster, Brenda shrieked. The fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by the vicious, venomous woman I knew so well. You planned this. You waited 10 years just to destroy us. You are a cold, heartless demon. The universe will punish you for what you have done to your own flesh and blood. I let a small, genuine smile cross my face. The universe did not freeze your bank accounts, Brenda, I replied smoothly. I did. Have a nice life. I ended the call and permanently blocked the number. The line went dead, taking the last remnants of my toxic childhood with it. I looked at the dark screen of my phone, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute peace. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation were completely severed. Hannah stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, tight embrace. Jamal joined the hug, his large frame wrapping around both of us like a protective shield. We stood there in the hospital corridor, a united front, a real family built on mutual respect and unbreakable loyalty. You did it, Hannah whispered, stepping back and wiping a tear of joy from her cheek. We are finally free of them. Yes, we are, I agreed, looking around the pristine hallways of the medical empire I now controlled. And we are going to build something incredible here. The cleanup over the next few months was relentless, but profoundly rewarding. I systematically restructured Oak Ridge General from the ground up. I fired the remaining corrupt administrators and replaced them with ethical, brilliant professionals who prioritized patient care over profit margins. MedTech Innovations launched the updated, fully calibrated neural mapping software, revolutionizing neurosurgery and saving countless lives. Cameron never saw the inside of an operating room again. He pled guilty to medical fraud and intellectual property theft to avoid a longer sentence, resulting in a permanent revocation of his medical license and 5 years in federal prison. Richard faced a massive racketeering indictment. His entire real estate empire was liquidated by the federal government to pay off his staggering debts and compensate the victims of Cameron's surgical errors. He was sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security facility. Brenda, stripped of her wealth, her high society status, and her enablers was forced to move into a tiny, rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. She got a job working as a cashier at a discount retail store. The women she used to mock at the country club now walked past her register pretending they did not know her. I never spoke to any of them again. I did not visit them in prison. I did not send money. I completely erased them from my reality, just as they had tried to erase me 10 years ago. Instead, I focused on the family I chose. Jamal and Hannah welcomed their first child a year later, and I became the fiercely protective aunt I was always meant to be. My career flourished, my company expanded globally, and I walked the halls of my hospital with my head held high, surrounded by a staff that respected my intellect and my leadership. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the very people you have to defeat to survive. They will use your loyalty as a weapon. They will demand your silence to protect their lies. But your worth is never determined by those who are too blind to see your brilliance. You have the power to walk away, to build your own empire, and to let karma handle the rest. Never let anyone tell you that you are useless just because you refuse to play by their toxic rules. Stand your ground, gather your evidence, and strike when they least expect it. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and future? Have you ever had to prove your family wrong by succeeding beyond their wildest dreams? Share your stories in the comments below. Let us build a community of survivors who know their true worth. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of ultimate karma and taking back your power. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is massive, undeniable success.